Minh Thúy xin kính chào quý vị hôm nay thứ Sáu, 26 tháng 4, 2024. Đến với VATV hôm nay gồm có phỏng vấn đặc biệt và nhạc lá bồ đề. Kính thưa quý vị, công việc của các nhân viên Sở Ngoại vụ đa phần là theo dõi và báo cáo những phong trào, biến cố đáng chú tâm ở Việt Nam. Như Lacy Wright đã nhận thấy ngay, theo dõi và tường trình là những việc vô cùng phức tạp. Những công việc theo dõi đó thường đưa đến những việc phải phân tích và tổng hợp rất nhiều những tin tức khác nhau và thường xuyên trái chiều. Chẳng những thế, đôi khi các cơ quan lại có những bản tin tường trình riêng, không đúng hẳn và đôi khi trực tiếp đối nghịch với những bản tường trình của các cơ quan khác. Chính phủ Mỹ phải làm gì khi nhận được những bản tin tường trình hoàn toàn khác biệt của Sở Ngoại vụ, CIA và Bộ Tư lệnh Viện trợ Quân sự Việt Nam? Xin mời quý vị theo dõi sự suy nghĩ và giải thích của ông Lacy Wright trong phần 5 phỏng vấn đặc biệt do Phan Lê Dũng, Võ Thành Nhân và Minh Thúy thực hiện.
Do you see any conflict between, you were mentioning the Hoa Hao and the Cao Đài and other sects? Do you, as you observe them, how big is the conflict between these religions or groups? How big is the conflict between them? Do you see any conflict?
You mean between the Hoa Hao and the
Yeah, and Cao Đài and other sects in the country? No.
Between them?
Between them.
Well, if it was going on, I didn't notice it. In fact, one of the things that I did notice, or believe I noticed in Vietnam, was that the Vietnamese who belonged to a certain group were not trying to proselytize people in other groups. Mm-hmm. If you were a Catholic, people, okay, he's Catholic. If you were a Buddhist, okay, he's a Buddhist. They were not trying to convert people from one to another. In fact, I'll tell you an amusing story. Mm-hmm. When I was down in the Delta, in Binh Binh province, there was an American pastor. He was a Protestant, and he was a good man. He was working among the Cambodian Vietnamese in Binh Binh province. And I can remember talking to a monk at one time in my guise as a reporter, and I said, "What do you think about Mr. So-and-so?" And the monk said, "Well, we know him well. He's a very good man. He has given us a lot of help. We like him. But there's one strange thing about him. He knows we're Theravada Buddhists, but he keeps wanting us to become Protestants." They couldn't understand that. It was foreign to them.
So you don't, from your experience, you did not see any deep division or anything like that between religion, because it was reported reported all the time in the magazine that there was a conflict between different sects of different religious sects.
Well, there was a lot of competition within, say, the Hoa Hao, among different groups within the Hoa Hao. It had nothing to do with religion. It had to do with politics and sometimes military.
The same thing with the Cao Đài.
Yeah,
and then
sure it was the same with the Cao Đài. I knew the Hoa Hao better because I was in the Mekong Delta, but I'm sure Cao Đài were the same.
Mm-hmm. What's the overall role? How do you see yourself? Just reporting these things?
Yes.
Nothing more? And you don't know how they use and why you're doing what you're doing?
Well, you're doing it in order to give the embassy and Washington a fuller picture of what is going on in Vietnam. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That was the purpose.
Yeah, but at the same time, you also have other groups like, say, the CIA, and then the military is also doing the same thing. So you three are doing the same activity, gathering information and trying to give the picture to Washington D.C. So how do you share information between these organizations?
Sure.
And we do.
Sure, but that's normal. It's going on now, wherever we are. We have the CIA, we have the Defense Intelligence Agency, we have all kinds of organization, or a number of organizations who are doing similar things. The idea is that when it gets to Washington and it's all put together, you have not a confusing picture, but a better picture of what is going on. Doesn't always work that way, of course.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's why after 9/11 we started a new overall intelligence organization to try to make sure that it was better coordinated. But that's the idea.
Mm-hmm. Do you see any improvement in the coordination between the year you said 69 you were there, and then from 69 say to 72? Is there any improvement? Because the reason I asked that question, because I talked to a lot of CIA agents and also a lot of people in the military advisor group, and they seem to doubt one another's information. For example, they don't. Most of the time, they don't mention your source, which is the foreign service, but the military and say the media, for example, is giving always the conflicting information. So I don't know what's making out of that, and which source is the ultimate source on the one that the government choose to see, and how do you reconcile
what
that?
part of the government?
The
Pentagon,
administration, yes.
The Pentagon would be looking at the Defense Attaché's office and all of that. State Department would have been looking at the embassy political section primarily,
Mm-hmm.
but all of them would have gotten the reporting of everybody else. So, and don't forget that Vietnam, there were so many Americans in Vietnam. It was so complicated that if you were an analyst trying to put all this stuff together, it would not have been an easy job. Here's another thing, though. I think that a lot of people reach the conclusion, because of the biased reporting out of the embassy, particularly, and the military, particularly in the early years,
Mm-hmm.
they used that, which was true, they used that to conclude that Washington was badly informed about the war. Daniel Ellsberg of Pentagon Papers fame, after the war, wrote an essay in which he said, yes, it's all true, there was all this bad reporting, but he said that the main decisions about the war, they were not made on the basis of faulty information.
Mm.
The White House had a pretty good idea of what was going on in Vietnam. They knew that the reporting was exaggerated. They sent people there all the time. They had access to all of the reporting, covert, everything, press, everything. They were not blind to what was happening in Vietnam, and they made their decisions for other reasons. President Johnson clearly made his decisions for domestic reasons, and so I would say that even though there was a lot of misreporting, and there must have been some consequence to that, overall, you can't. I would not blame any failure, either on our part or that of the South Vietnamese, on bad reporting.
Mm.
With maybe one exception. And Frank Snepp has written about this and talked about it. Near the end of the war, there was, and this was as a result of our overly optimistic reporting, especially in the military channel. We had a pretty poor grasp of what was going on within the Vietnamese military with regard, say, to logistics, which turned out to be a terribly important subject near the end of the war. And in fact, even today, you have a debate among people as to whether Vietnam was out of ammunition or not. Pretty important subject. And you have people on both sides of that question saying, yeah, they were almost out of ammunition. That's one of the reasons they lost the war. We have other people who say they had plenty of ammunition. Often they didn't know where it was. It wasn't distributed in a way that they could track it as well as they should have been able to. But there was no shortage of ammunition. Well, I don't know the answer to that. I just know that it's an important.
Minh Thúy xin kính chào quý vị hôm nay thứ Sáu, 3 tháng 5, 2024. Đến với VATV hôm nay gồm có phỏng vấn đặc biệt và nhạc lá bồ đề. Kính thưa quý vị, một trong những khó khăn nhất của các chuyên gia phân tích cuộc chiến Việt Nam là ý kiến của người dân. Người dân miền Nam Việt Nam thực sự suy nghĩ như thế nào trong cuộc chiến? Họ có theo dõi sát những biến động thời sự hay không? Người dân ở các thành phố có suy nghĩ khác với người dân thôn quê hay không? Và nếu có, thì sự khác biệt đó như thế nào? Tại sao với kỹ thuật và giới truyền thông hiện đại như vậy mà người Mỹ lại không thể giúp cho người dân biết rõ tình cảnh của họ? Hơn nữa, tuy đã biết rõ tình hình nguy ngập của Sài Gòn rất từ lâu, tại sao Mỹ đã chần chờ, không hành động cho đến phút cuối khi việc đã trở thành quá trễ? Xin mời quý vị theo dõi sự suy nghĩ và giải thích của ông Lacy Wright trong phần 6 phỏng vấn đặc biệt do Phan Lê Dũng, Võ Thành Nhân và Minh Thúy thực hiện.
What's your personal experience in dealing with the Vietnamese whom you're observing? How do you think they fare along with, how much do they really know about reality? Are they far away from reality? Or are they reacting in a too narrow-minded way? Or how does it feel for you? I mean, how does a typical Vietnamese feel for you at the time?
I guess it very much depends on whether they were out in the villages and hamlets or whether they were in Saigon or another big city. I think that the people who were in Saigon and probably other large cities didn't know much about how the war was going. Civilians I'm talking about. I think that they, and especially at the end, that's clear. They did not know, for example, how in what dire straits the government was right at the end. That's clear.
Was that because of their ignorance, or was that they ill-informed? I mean,
they were badly informed, and well, first of all, I don't think many ordinary Vietnamese, say in Saigon, followed the progress of the war very closely. That's my guess. I don't think they did. And then you had both the Americans and the South Vietnamese government telling him that things were okay. But clearly, after the terrible botched withdrawal from the northern part of South Vietnam, and this heartbreaking breakdown, with people streaming south and so on and so on, clearly the war was over. War was over. But a lot of people didn't realize that. A lot of civilians in Saigon didn't realize that because they were being fed information that wasn't accurate.
And what's the American role in that? I mean, why couldn't they get more educated with all the information that we get? Is that
well, I'm afraid the Americans did have a role in that, and particularly through Ambassador Graham Martin, because he was trying very hard to hold everything together. He turned out to believe, mistakenly, that, well, first of all, he was trying to hold together the situation in Saigon and everywhere else that he could. And there are good reasons why one would want to do that. God forbid that the people of Saigon had risen up and everybody gone to the airport at the same time. Would have been awful. So you can understand that. But I'm afraid that he really believed that there was a chance that there could be an agreement with the communist side that would have allowed a much more orderly exodus from Vietnam and much less turmoil and bloodshed. He turned out to have been dead wrong about that, and one has to regard that as a black mark against his ambassadorship at the time. He had apparently different kinds of information. He chose to believe information that was not true and was never true.
Back to your court, when you were working with the court, generally speaking, how do you see they function with the court? Court as an organization. I mean,
okay. Well, courts started out, as you know, in 1967. It was not the first effort to try to engage in pacification in Vietnam. There were previous, 2 or 3 previous efforts that were seen not to work. There was the Agroville program inherited from the French.
Strategic Hamlet. Yes.
Hamlet program. There was OCO. But finally, they kind of got it right. In 1967, they formed this civilian military organization to look after pacification. And it included, as I see it, there were two general kinds of pacification. There was the military side, in which one tried to help the regional forces, the provincial forces, be trained and be able to protect their own areas. And then there was the civilian part, which I think today would be called nation building. And I think that there were a lot of achievements in this area. The Cords people at all of these different levels were building roads, they were constructing markets, they were bringing in TV stations, communication, they were building schools, and maybe most interesting of all and most important of all, there was the land reform program, the land of the tiller. Now, the land of the tiller was not part of Cords, but certainly it was part of the overall effort for South Vietnam to become a strong and functioning country. And I think it's very interesting today to look back on the land reform program, which everybody agrees was a success. It was done the right way. It was funded by the Americans, mostly. It was the gist of it was that landowners were paid for their land. It was expropriated, but they were paid for it. Maybe not as much as they wanted, but more than a token amount. And then it was given to individual farmers. Contrast that with the communist land reform program of 1953, 54, 55.
Yes.
First of all, they never paid anybody for the land they took. In fact, they killed a number of the landowners. It was just a disastrous, it was such a disastrous and violent program that even they, after 3 or 4 years, had to pull back and realize they had made a lot of big mistakes. So what a difference, huh? And I think it's a very useful example to bring up when you want to compare these two systems and how they operated in the real world.
A lot of people say the knowledge of the certain people were inadequate.
I'm sorry, the what?
The knowledge about the government, what they're doing, what they're striving for, what they have done, their accomplishment, was misunderstood by the South Vietnamese people. Would you say that's a correct judgment?
Well, I don't know, but it's easy to believe. Easy to believe. Don't forget that, of course, most people, especially outside of the big cities, were constantly subject to propaganda by the communist side, and they were very good at this. So, yeah, I can easily believe that a lot of people were either misled or were just ignorant of what was going on.